Standing in the middle of Sky Harbor International Airport at 6:30 a.m., watching my husband Daniel drive away through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt something crack inside my chest. Not my heart, that had already shattered 3 hours earlier, when I discovered the truth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. This was something deeper, something that had been building pressure for months. As his silver BMW disappeared into the Phoenix sunrise, I pulled out my phone and opened an app that would change everything. By the time I walked onto that plane, 4 hours later, sipping champagne in first class while Daniel sat cramped in economy, frantically trying to reach me, I had already rewritten the ending to our story. The look on his face when he saw me there, perfectly composed in seat 2A while he shuffled past to row 27, was worth every sleepless night I'd spent building my business while he was building his lies. The morning started like any other Tuesday in our Scottsdale home. Daniel was rushing around the kitchen, gulping coffee while checking his phone with that intense concentration he claimed was work-related. I was double-checking my carry-on, making sure I had everything for the 3-day tech conference in Seattle, the event that was supposed to be my big break into corporate consulting for Silicon Valley companies. "You sure you can't drop me off a little later?" I asked, noting how early he was pushing to leave. "My flight doesn't board until 8:45. "Traffic's going to be brutal," he said without looking up from his screen. "Besides, I have that client. Breakfast at 7:30, remember? Can't be late for the Morrison account." I nodded, accepting his logic like I had accepted so many of his explanations over the past 6 months. Daniel had always been ambitious about his marketing career, and the Morrison account was supposedly the biggest deal his firm had landed all year. As someone who understood the demands of building a business, I respected his dedication. What I didn't know yet was that there was no Morrison breakfast. There was no Morrison account. There was only Ashley Rodriguez, his colleague from the Portland office, who was flying in that morning for a very different kind of meeting. We drove to the airport in comfortable silence, Daniel's fingers drumming against the steering wheel, to some internal rhythm while I reviewed my presentation notes one more time. Desert Rose Travel Consulting had grown from my one-woman operation 3 years ago into a boutique firm that specialized in luxury corporate travel arrangements. This Seattle conference represented my chance to pitch to tech companies that could transform my business from regional to national. "You nervous?" Daniel asked as we pulled into the departure area. "Excited," I corrected. "This could be everything I've worked for." He smiled, the same crooked grin that had first caught my attention at a Phoenix Suns game 4 years earlier. "You'll knock them dead, Claire. You always do." The kiss he gave me before I got out of the car tasted like coffee and something else I couldn't identify. Later, I would realize it was guilt. Sky Harbor was already bustling with early morning travelers. I made my way through security, grateful for my TSA pre-check status, and settled into a quiet corner of the food court with a green tea and a breakfast burrito. The conference materials spread across the small table represented months of preparation. I had researched every potential client who would be attending, memorized their company profiles, and crafted personalized pitches that highlighted how Desert Rose could streamline their corporate travel while reducing costs. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, my business partner and best friend since college. "Knock 'em dead in Seattle. The office will be boring without your neurotic pre-trip energy." I smiled, typing back a quick response about how I wasn't neurotic, just thorough. Jessica had joined Desert Rose 18 months ago, when her marketing background proved invaluable for expanding our client base. She handled the creative side while I managed operations and client relationships, a partnership that had doubled our revenue in the past year. Another buzz, this time from my airline app. Flight 447 to Seattle. On-time departure. Mobile boarding pass ready. I opened the notification to double-check my seat assignment. 14C, middle seat in economy. Not ideal for a 3-hour flight, But the company budget didn't stretch to business class upgrades yet. That's when I saw it. A second notification I hadn't expected. Companion ticket activated for Flight 447, seat assignment 27F. I stared at my phone screen, reading the message 3 times before the words sank in. Companion ticket. Daniels. Frequent flyer account was linked to mine for family travel benefits, but he wasn't supposed to be on this flight. He was supposed to be in Phoenix, meeting with the Morrison account. My hands moved without conscious thought, opening the airline's app and navigating to the passenger manifest. There it was, clear as the Arizona desert sky outside the terminal. Windows, Daniel Thompson, seat 27F, flight 447 to Seattle. The breakfast burrito turned to cardboard in my mouth. I set it aside and pulled up Daniel's text messages from the past week, scanning for any mention of Seattle or travel. Nothing. Just the usual work complaints, dinner suggestions, and logistical conversations about my trip. My travel industry connections had taught me to be thorough when something didn't add up. I opened my laptop and accessed the professional database I used for corporate travel arrangements. A quick search of Seattle hotel bookings under Daniel's name yielded nothing, but when I expanded the search to include common variations and nicknames, I found it. The Fairmont Olympic Hotel. A reservation for 2 nights, checking in today. Room booked for 2 guests under D. Thompson and A. Rodriguez. Ashley Rodriguez. I knew that name. Daniel's colleague from the Portland office who had been mentioned. Increasingly often in his work conversations over the past 3 months. The brilliant creative director who was helping him pitch for bigger accounts. The woman whose LinkedIn photo showed sleek black hair, warm brown eyes, and a smile that could sell ice to penguins. I sat in that airport food court, surrounded by the ordinary chaos of travelers rushing to their gates, and felt my carefully constructed world tilt sideways. The evidence was circumstantial but damning. Daniel had lied about his morning meeting, booked himself on my flight without telling me, and reserved a hotel room in Seattle for himself and another woman. The rational part of my brain scrambled for innocent explanations. Maybe Ashley was helping with a client presentation. Maybe the hotel booking was a mistake or a professional necessity he hadn't thought to mention. Maybe the companion ticket was an error in the airline system. But my gut knew better. My gut recognized the pattern I had been unconsciously noting for months. The increased phone calls he took in private, the sudden interest in working late, the way his eyes would drift when I talked about my own business challenges. The signs had been there, scattered like breadcrumbs through our conversations, and I had been too focused on my own ambitions to connect them. I closed my laptop and sat back in the uncomfortable plastic chair, watching planes taxi past the windows. In 45 minutes, I would board Flight 447 to what was supposed to be the most important conference of my career. Somewhere on that same plane, my husband would be traveling to what appeared to be a romantic getaway with another woman. The old Claire, the Claire who had spent 4 years accommodating Daniel's schedule, supporting his career moves, and believing his explanations, even when they felt thin, might have confronted him immediately. She might have called, demanded answers, caused a scene that would derail both our travel plans and potentially sabotage my business opportunity. But sitting there in Sky Harbor, surrounded by the tools of my trade and the evidence of my success, I realized something important. I wasn't the same woman who had started Desert Rose Travel Consulting 3 years ago with nothing but determination and a borrowed laptop. I had built a business from the ground up, learned to navigate complex corporate relationships, and developed the kind of strategic thinking that turned problems into opportunities. If Daniel wanted to play games, I would play to win. I opened my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Marcus Rodriguez, a gate agent I had worked with dozens of times when arranging VIP travel for my high-end clients. Marcus owed me favors, several of them, actually, from the times I had smoothly handled last-minute changes and difficult passengers that could have created problems for his shifts. "Claire, what brings you to my gate this early?" Marcus's voice was warm with genuine friendliness when he answered his desk phone. "Actually, I need a favor," I said, keeping my voice light and professional. "I'm on flight 447 this morning, and I was wondering if there were any first-class upgrades available. I know it's last minute, but I have a major client presentation in Seattle, and the extra space would be invaluable for preparation." "Let me check," Marcus said, and I could hear him typing. "You're in luck. We have 2A available. That's actually our premium first-class seat with the most privacy. Normally there'd be an upgrade fee, but—" He paused, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "Consider it a professional courtesy for all the times you've made my job easier." "Marcus, you're amazing. Can you make that change now?" "Already." "Done. Your new boarding pass is ready at the gate. Anything else you need?" I thought for a moment, an idea forming. "Actually, yes. Could you put me on the priority boarding list? I'd like to get settled before the general boarding begins." "Of course. You'll board with our premium passengers right after first class is called." I thanked Marcus and hung up, feeling the first stirrings of what would become a very satisfying morning. The upgrade to first class wasn't just about comfort, it was about positioning. When Daniel boarded with the general economy passengers, he would walk directly past my seat. He would see me there, composed and clearly thriving, while he made his way to the back of the plane with whatever story he had constructed to explain his presence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But I wasn't done yet. The morning had taught me that information was power, and I had barely scratched the surface of what I needed to know. I opened my laptop again and began what I privately called professional reconnaissance. As someone who arranged high-end travel for executives, I had access to industry databases that most people never knew existed. Hotel booking systems, airline passenger manifests, restaurant reservation platforms. The digital paper trail of modern travel was extensive if you knew where to look. The Fairmont Olympic reservation revealed more details under close examination. The room was a junior suite, booked with Daniel's credit card but requested under both names. The check-in date was today, check-out Thursday, exactly matching the dates of my conference. Dinner reservations at the hotel's Georgian room for 2 people tonight at 8 p.m. Spa appointments for couples massage therapy tomorrow afternoon. Each detail was another small knife twist, but I found myself analyzing them with professional detachment rather than emotional devastation. This wasn't just infidelity. It was a carefully planned romantic getaway that coincided exactly with my business trip. Daniel hadn't just cheated. He had used my conference as cover for his affair. My phone rang, interrupting my research. Daniel's name appeared on the screen. "Hey, babe." His voice was casual, unremarkable. "Just wanted to check that you made it to the airport okay. Traffic wasn't too bad after all." "I'm here," I said, proud of how normal my voice sounded. "Just having some breakfast before boarding." "Good, good." "Listen, I might be unreachable for parts of today. That Morrison presentation is going to be intense, and you know how Patterson gets when we're in strategy sessions." Patterson was Daniel's boss, a detail that made his lie even more elaborate. I wondered how many fictional meetings and imaginary clients he had created to cover this trip. "Of course," I said. "I'll probably be busy with conference stuff anyway. Might not be able to text much." "Perfect. Love you. Knock 'em dead in Seattle." "I will," I said, and meant it in ways he couldn't imagine. After hanging up, I sat quietly for a moment, processing the surreal conversation. Daniel was literally sitting somewhere in this same airport, preparing to board the same flight as me, while maintaining the fiction that he was in Phoenix for work. The audacity was almost impressive. My phone buzzed with another text from Jessica. "Airport coffee hitting different this morning? You've been quiet on the group chat." I realized I hadn't posted my usual travel updates, the selfies with my boarding pass, complaints about security lines, or excitement about the conference. For the first time in months, I felt like I was operating from a position of knowledge rather than ignorance, and it was intoxicating. "Just focused on the presentation," I texted back, feeling really good about this trip. And I was. For the first time since reading that companion ticket notification, I felt genuinely excited about what the next few hours would bring. Daniel thought he was orchestrating a perfect deception, managing his wife and his mistress with the same casual efficiency he brought to his marketing campaigns. He had no idea that his wife had just become his most formidable competitor. The boarding announcement for Flight 447 crackled over the intercom, calling first-class passengers to the gate. I gathered my materials, shouldered my carry-on bag, and walked toward what would become the most satisfying airplane ride of my life. Behind me, somewhere in the general boarding area, Daniel was preparing for a very different kind of flight than he had planned. The first-class cabin of Flight 447 was everything I had imagined when booking premium travel for my clients, but had never experienced myself. Seat 2A offered a window view and enough space to spread out my conference materials without bumping elbows with fellow passengers. Linda, the first-class flight attendant, greeted me with the kind of warm professionalism I had come to appreciate in the hospitality industry. "Welcome aboard, Ms. Thompson. Can I start you with some champagne while we prepare for takeoff?" "That would be perfect," I replied, settling into the leather seat that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. The champagne was crisp and cold, a sharp contrast to the heat building in my chest as I waited for general boarding to begin. Through the first-class cabin's entrance, I could see the gate area where passengers were forming the usual chaotic lines. Somewhere in that crowd was Daniel, probably checking his phone and mentally rehearsing whatever story he would tell Ashley about his early arrival in Seattle. He had always been good at managing multiple narratives, though I was only beginning to understand the full extent of his skill. The captain's voice came over the intercom, announcing a slight delay due to air traffic control. Perfect. More time to observe and prepare for what would undoubtedly be an interesting encounter when Daniel walked past my seat. I pulled out my phone and opened the Notes app, beginning to document everything I had discovered in the past 2 hours. Years of managing complex travel arrangements had taught me the importance of detailed records, and this situation would be no different. The companion ticket activation, the hotel reservation, the spa appointments. Each piece of evidence was carefully recorded with timestamps and confirmation numbers. My business mind was already working ahead, calculating the implications. Daniel's deception wasn't just personal betrayal, it was financial fraud. He had used our joint credit card for the hotel and spa reservations, charged the companion ticket, to our shared frequent flyer account, and presumably planned to claim the entire trip as a business expense. As someone who managed corporate travel budgets, I recognized embezzlement when I saw it. The first wave of general boarding passengers began filing past first class, and I looked up from my phone to scan each face. Groups of business travelers, families with small children, college students heading back to school, the usual mix of domestic flight passengers. No Daniel yet, but his seat in row 27 meant he would board with the later groups. "Nervous flyer?" Linda asked, noticing my attention to the boarding process. "Not exactly," I said with a smile that felt more genuine than any I had managed in weeks. "Just curious about my fellow passengers." She nodded knowingly. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and people watching never gets old. Everyone has a story." Everyone certainly did have a story, and I was about to rewrite mine completely. My phone buzzed with an email from the Seattle conference organizers, confirming my registration and providing the final schedule. 3 days of networking events, panel discussions, and pitch sessions with potential clients who could transform Desert Rose Travel Consulting into a national company. I had spent months preparing for this opportunity, crafting presentations that showcased our unique approach to luxury corporate travel. The irony wasn't lost on me. while I had been building a business around creating perfect travel experiences. For others, my own husband had been using those same skills to orchestrate the perfect betrayal. Daniel had always admired my attention to detail, my ability to anticipate problems and create seamless experiences. Apparently, he had been taking notes. Another group of passengers filed past, and this time I spotted him. Daniel was in line about 10 people back, looking relaxed and confident in his favorite navy blazer. He was scrolling through his phone, with the casual air of someone who believed his deceptions were perfectly secure. For a moment, I felt a flicker of the old affection that had sustained our relationship through 4 years of marriage. He looked handsome and successful, the kind of man who drew second glances from other women in airports. Then I remembered Ashley Rodriguez's spa appointment, and the feeling evaporated. Daniel's line moved forward, bringing him closer to the first-class cabin entrance. I positioned myself casually in my seat, champagne glass in hand, conference materials artfully spread across the small table. The picture of a successful businesswoman traveling in comfort, which I realized was exactly what I was. When he appeared in the cabin doorway, scanning seat numbers to orient himself toward the back of the plane, I was ready. I looked up from my laptop at precisely the right moment, making eye contact with the expression of mild surprise. "Daniel?" His face went through a remarkable series of transformations in the span of 3 seconds. Confusion, recognition, shock, and then a kind of panicked calculation as he tried to process how his wife could possibly be sitting in first class when she was supposed to be in economy seat 14C. "Claire?" His voice cracked slightly on my name. "What are you doing up here?" I gestured to the spacious seat and elegant surroundings with the casual air of someone accustomed to luxury travel. "Last-minute upgrade. You know how these things work with frequent flyer status." I paused, letting him absorb the implication that I was more connected in the travel industry than he had realized. "The question is, what are you doing on this plane? I thought you had the Morrison breakfast this morning." The passengers behind Daniel were beginning to back up, creating a small traffic jam in the cabin entrance. He stepped slightly to the side, but couldn't move forward without abandoning our conversation, and couldn't step back without blocking the boarding process entirely. It was a perfect trap of social pressure and spatial logistics. "There was a change of plans," he said, his marketing-trained smile looking strained around the edges. "Morrison had to reschedule, and it turned out Patterson needed me in Seattle for a client emergency. Last-minute booking, you know how it is." I nodded sympathetically, while mentally cataloging the layers of his improvised story. Patterson was his boss, so that detail was designed to make the trip seem mandatory rather than optional. The client emergency implied urgency that would explain why he hadn't mentioned it earlier. And the last-minute booking explained why he was in economy while I was in first class, a detail that clearly bothered him more than he wanted to admit. "What a coincidence," I said, taking another sip of champagne. "We'll be in Seattle at the same time. Maybe we can have dinner one night if your work schedule allows." The offer hung in the air between us like a challenge. Daniel's eyes darted from my face to the champagne glass, to the leather seat that represented a level of travel luxury he knew our budget couldn't normally accommodate. Behind him, passengers were getting impatient, and a flight attendant was approaching to resolve the boarding bottleneck. "That would be great," he said quickly, "but this Patterson thing is going to be pretty intense. Might not have much free time." "Of course," I replied with understanding warmth. "Work comes first. I completely understand." The flight attendant reached us, and Daniel had no choice but to continue down the aisle toward his seat in economy. As he walked away, I watched him pull out his phone, undoubtedly texting someone, Ashley, most likely, about the unexpected complication of his wife's presence on the flight. Linda returned with the champagne bottle, topping off my glass with a conspiratorial smile. "Old friend?" "Husband, actually," I said, watching Daniel's head disappear behind the economy section divider. Her eyebrows rose slightly. "And he's sitting in coach while you're up here? That's either very modern or there's a story there." "There's definitely a story," I agreed, raising my glass in a small toast to whatever was coming next. The plane pushed back from the gate exactly on schedule, and I settled into my seat for the 3-hour flight to Seattle. My laptop was open, conference materials spread across the table, but my mind was already working several moves ahead. Daniel thought he was managing a complex situation with typical efficiency, keeping his wife unaware while pursuing his affair under the cover of a business trip. What he didn't realize was that he had just handed me every advantage in a game he didn't even know we were playing. During takeoff, I composed a carefully worded text message to Jessica. "Interesting development on the flight. We'll call you when I land. Desert Rose is about to get a lot more publicity than we planned." Jessica's response came through as soon as we reached cruising altitude. "That sounds ominous and exciting. Everything okay?" "Better than okay," I typed back. "Sometimes the best business opportunities come from the most unexpected places." I spent the next hour reviewing my conference presentation, but with a new perspective. The pitch I had prepared focused on reliability, discretion, and attention to detail, qualities that prevented exactly the kind of situation Daniel had created for himself. My personal experience was about to become a powerful professional case study. Somewhere behind me in economy, Daniel was probably struggling with the cramped seating and wondering how his carefully orchestrated plan had developed its first complication. He had no way of knowing that the complication was just beginning. 2 hours into the flight, I excused myself to use the restroom, a journey that required walking through the economy section where Daniel was seated. I moved down the aisle with the confident stride of someone comfortable in her own skin, noting the cramped conditions and harried expressions of the economy passengers. Travel comfort wasn't just about luxury, it was about arriving at your destination relaxed and prepared for whatever challenges awaited. Daniel's seat was on the aisle, and I could see him hunched over his phone, typing rapidly. As I approached, he looked up with the startled expression of someone caught in the middle of something complicated. "How's the Patterson emergency shaping?" "Up?" I asked, pausing beside his row. "Complicated," he said, quickly minimizing whatever he had been typing. "Lots of moving pieces to coordinate." I nodded sympathetically. I know that feeling. The travel industry is all about managing complex logistics while keeping clients happy. One small mistake can unravel everything. The woman in the middle seat looked up from her book, clearly intrigued by our conversation. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, aware that his response was being overheard by strangers. "Exactly," he said, his voice carrying the strain of someone trying to sound casual while feeling anything but. "That's why these last-minute situations are so challenging." "Well, I won't keep you from your work," I said graciously. "I know how important it is to stay ahead of potential problems." I continued toward the restroom, feeling his eyes on my back and knowing that every word of our conversation had been carefully chosen. Daniel was beginning to understand that his wife was operating from a position of knowledge and confidence that he hadn't anticipated. The question was how long it would take him to realize just how much trouble he was in. In the restroom mirror, I looked at myself with new clarity. The woman staring back had spent 4 years accommodating a husband who had apparently been lying to her for months. But she was also someone who had built a successful business from nothing, earned the respect of demanding clients, and developed the kind of strategic thinking that turned challenges into opportunities. When I returned to first class, Linda offered me a warm towel and asked if I needed anything for the remainder of the flight. "Actually," I said, "could you help me with something? I'm going to need to make some calls as soon as we land, and I want to make sure I'm positioned for a quick exit." "Of course. You're already in the premium boarding group, so you'll be among the first passengers off the plane." Perfect. while Daniel was trapped in the economy section waiting for his row to be called for deplaning. I would already be in the terminal making the phone calls that would reshape both our immediate future and our marriage. The captain announced our initial descent into Seattle, and I began organizing my materials for landing. The conference was still my primary objective, but it was no longer my only one. Daniel had turned our trip into a complex game of deception and discovery, and I intended to win. As the plane descended through the cloud cover toward SeaTac Airport, I looked out the window at the Seattle skyline and felt something I hadn't experienced in months: genuine excitement about what was coming next. The woman who had boarded this flight in Phoenix had been operating from a position of ignorance and assumption. The woman who was about to land in Seattle was someone entirely different, someone with information, resources, and a clear understanding of exactly what she was worth. Daniel had planned this trip as the perfect cover for his affair, a carefully orchestrated deception that would allow him to pursue Ashley Rodriguez while maintaining his marriage. What he had created instead was the perfect opportunity for his wife to demonstrate exactly why underestimating her had been his biggest mistake. The plane touched down smoothly at SeaTac, and I gathered my belongings with the calm efficiency of someone who knew exactly what came next. Behind me, Daniel was trapped in his economy seat, probably calculating how quickly he could deplane and get to his hotel without another awkward encounter. He was about to discover that his problems were just beginning. I was among the first passengers off the plane, striding through the jetway with the confidence of someone who belonged in first class. The Seattle airport was busy with the usual mix of business travelers and tourists, but I moved through the crowds with purpose. While Daniel was still trapped in the aircraft waiting for his row to be called, I was already at the taxi stand, giving the driver the address of the Fairmont Olympic Hotel. The drive into downtown Seattle gave me time to make the phone calls that would set the next phase of my plan in motion. First, I called the hotel directly, using the reservation confirmation number I had found in Daniel's booking. Fairmont Olympic, this is Marcus speaking. How may I assist you? Hi, Marcus. I'm calling about reservation confirmation number 847291. Under the name Thompson. I need to make some changes to the booking. Of course, let me pull that up. I see a junior suite for 2 nights checking in today. How can I help you? I'm going to be arriving earlier than my companion, and I wanted to confirm that the room will be ready for early check-in. Also, can you please add a note to the reservation that any charges should be verified with me personally before being processed? Certainly, Ms. Rodriguez. I'll make those notes in the system. I didn't correct his assumption about my identity. In the hospitality industry, flexibility and discretion were valued qualities, and Marcus was clearly trained to accommodate guest requests without asking unnecessary questions. Also, I continued, could you please confirm the dinner reservation for tonight? I want to make sure everything is perfect. Yes, you have a table for 2 at the Georgian Room at 8 p.m. Would you like to make any changes to that reservation? Not yet, but I may need to adjust the party size. I'll call back if anything changes. The second call was to Jessica, whose voice was bright with curiosity when she answered. Okay, I've been dying to know what this mysterious development is. Your texts have been very cryptic. Remember how you always said I was too trusting when it came to Daniel's work schedule? Oh no. Please tell me this isn't going where I think it's going. I gave her a condensed version of the morning's discoveries, from the companion ticket notification to Daniel's presence on my flight. Jessica's responses progressed from shock to anger to what sounded suspiciously like admiration. So you're telling me that while your husband thought he was orchestrating the perfect affair, you were upgrading yourself to first class and conducting corporate espionage from 30,000 feet. I prefer to think of it as competitive intelligence gathering, I said with a smile that Jessica could probably hear through the phone. Claire, this is either going to be the most empowering thing you've ever done or a complete disaster. Please, tell me you have a plan that goes beyond making him uncomfortable on airplanes. I'm working on it, I admitted, But the conference is still my priority. I've spent too much time and money preparing for this opportunity to let Daniel's drama derail my career. Good, because whatever happens with your marriage, Desert Rose Travel Consulting needs to come out of this stronger than ever. We've worked too hard to let some cheating husband destroy what we've built. Jessica's fierce loyalty reminded me why our partnership worked so well. She understood that this situation was about more than personal betrayal. It was about respect, integrity, and the value of what we had created together. The taxi pulled up to the Fairmont Olympic, a grand hotel that embodied the kind of luxury hospitality experience my clients expected. The doorman greeted me with professional warmth, and the marble lobby spoke of old-world elegance combined with modern amenities. Under different circumstances, I would have appreciated the hotel's attention to detail as a professional studying her competition. At the front desk, I approached with the confidence of someone accustomed to high-end accommodations. "Good afternoon. I'm checking in under reservation 847291, Thompson Party." The desk clerk, a polished woman in her 30s, pulled up the reservation with efficient keystrokes. "Welcome to the Fairmont Olympic, Ms. Rodriguez. I see you're with us for 2 nights in our junior suite. Your room is ready, and I have a note here about verifying charges personally." Again, I didn't correct the name assumption. In this situation, ambiguity was my ally. "Perfect. Also, I'm expecting my business partner to join me later today. Could you please make sure that any messages or calls are handled with discretion? We're working on some sensitive negotiations." Of course. Our concierge staff is trained to handle confidential business matters. Is there anything else you need to make your stay more comfortable? Actually, yes. I'd like to speak with someone about possibly upgrading the dinner reservation tonight. The Georgian room booking for 8 p.m. might need to accommodate additional guests. She nodded and picked up the phone to connect me with the restaurant manager. Within minutes, I had expanded the dinner reservation from 2 people to 4, with a note that the final party size would be confirmed by 6 p.m. The junior suite was everything the online photos had promised: spacious, elegantly appointed, and offering a stunning view of Elliott Bay. More importantly, it provided the perfect setting for whatever confrontation was coming. I had learned long ago that environment shaped negotiation, and I intended to control every variable I could. I unpacked my conference materials and spread them across the suite's desk, but my mind was already working on a different kind of presentation. Daniel thought he was arriving to a romantic rendezvous with Ashley Rodriguez, unaware that his wife was waiting with a front-row seat to his deception. My phone rang, and Daniel's name appeared on the screen. Perfect timing. "Hey, babe. Just landed in Seattle. This Patterson situation is even more complicated than I expected." "Oh no," I said with convincing concern. "Are you going to be stuck in meetings all day?" "Probably. In fact, I'm not even sure I'll make it back to the hotel until late tonight. This client is demanding immediate attention." I looked around the luxurious suite that he had booked for his affair, noting the champagne chilling in an ice bucket and the rose petals scattered across the king-size bed. Apparently, the hotel's romance package was part of his Seattle itinerary. "That sounds stressful," I said sympathetically. "Where are you staying? Maybe I can send some coffee or food to help you get through the long day." "Oh, it's just some business hotel near the client's office. Nothing fancy. Don't worry about me. Focus on your conference. How did your flight go?" "Interesting," I replied, which was certainly true. "I met some fascinating people. You know, how networking opportunities can come from the most unexpected places." "That's great, babe. Listen, I should probably get going. This Patterson thing isn't going to resolve itself." "Of course. Good luck with everything. I hope it all works out exactly the way you planned." After hanging up, I sat in the suite's comfortable armchair and considered my options. The old Claire would have confronted Daniel immediately, demanding explanations and probably ending up in a screaming match that resolved nothing. But the Claire who had built Desert Rose Travel Consulting from the ground up had learned the value of patience, planning, and strategic timing. Daniel expected to arrive at the hotel later that afternoon for a romantic evening with Ashley Rodriguez. What he would find instead was a carefully orchestrated revelation that would force him to confront not just his infidelity, but his fundamental underestimation of the woman he had married. I opened my laptop and began composing an email that would ensure this evening went exactly according to my plan, not his. The conference registration desk at the Seattle Convention Center was bustling with tech industry professionals, venture capitalists, and entrepreneurs from across the Pacific Northwest. I collected my badge and welcome packet with the same focused energy I brought to every business opportunity, but there was an additional sharpness to my attention now. Everything I had planned for this conference remained important, but the events of the morning had added layers of complexity that required careful navigation. My first scheduled meeting was with Rebecca Chen, the head of corporate travel for a rapidly expanding software company based in Portland. We had connected through LinkedIn months ago, and her company represented exactly the kind of client that could transform Desert Rose from a regional player into a national presence. What she didn't know was that I was now operating with a very different kind of motivation than when we had first scheduled our meeting. Claire Thompson from Desert Rose Travel Consulting, I introduced myself, extending my hand as Rebecca approached, our designated meeting spot near the main exhibition hall. Rebecca Chen, thank you so much for making time today. I've been looking forward to this conversation ever since I saw your presentation materials online. Your approach to luxury corporate travel management is exactly what we've been seeking. We settled into a quiet corner of the conference center's networking lounge, and I spread out the portfolio that represented months of preparation. But, as I began my standard presentation about Desert Rose's services, I found myself drawing on experiences that were literally unfolding in real time. One of the things that sets Desert Rose apart, I said, is our understanding that business travel isn't just about getting from point A to point B. It's about maintaining professional confidence and personal dignity even when circumstances become unexpectedly challenging. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. Can you give me an example of what you mean by that? I paused, considering how much personal detail was appropriate in a professional context. Just this morning, I found myself in a situation where last-minute changes to travel arrangements could have been disruptive to my entire business schedule. But because I maintain strong relationships with industry contacts and always prepare for contingencies, I was able to turn a potential problem into an opportunity for upgraded service. That's exactly the kind of proactive problem-solving we need, Rebecca said, leaning forward with increased interest. Our executives often face complex travel situations where standard booking services fall short. We need a partner who can think strategically under pressure. The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, and by the end, Rebecca had committed to a trial period for Desert Rose's services with her company's senior leadership team. It was the kind of breakthrough I had hoped for when planning this conference, but the success felt different now. I wasn't just building my business anymore. I was proving to myself that I could excel professionally, even while my personal life was in chaos. After Rebecca left, I checked my phone to find 3 missed calls from Daniel and a series of increasingly urgent text messages. Client meeting ended early, heading to hotel now. Are you free for dinner tonight? Would love to catch up properly. Call me when you get this. Need to discuss something important. I smiled at the progression of his messages, recognizing the tone of someone whose carefully laid plans were beginning to require improvisation. Daniel had expected to spend the day coordinating with Ashley Rodriguez about their evening plans. Instead, he was trying to manage the unexpected complication of his wife's presence in the same city. Rather than responding immediately, I continued with my scheduled conference activities. The afternoon included a panel discussion on emerging trends in corporate travel, where I found myself contributing insights about the importance of transparency and trust in client relationships. The irony of discussing professional integrity while my husband was orchestrating an elaborate deception wasn't lost on me, but it also reinforced my growing sense of clarity about what I valued in both business and personal relationships. During the coffee break between sessions, I finally returned Daniel's call. "Claire, thank God." His voice carried a mixture of relief and tension. I was starting to worry that something had happened. "Just busy with conference activities," I said truthfully. "You know how these networking events can consume your entire day. How are things going with the Patterson situation?" "Complicated, but manageable. Listen, I have some unexpected free time this evening. Would you like to have dinner? I know you're probably exhausted from your presentations, but it would be nice to connect." The invitation hung in the air between us, loaded with implications that Daniel couldn't possibly understand. He was trying to maintain his cover story while simultaneously managing whatever arrangements he had made with Ashley. What he didn't realize was that I had spent the past several hours gaining clarity about exactly how I wanted this evening to unfold. "That sounds wonderful," I said warmly. "I actually have a dinner reservation at my hotel's restaurant, the Georgian Room at the Fairmont Olympic. Would 8 o'clock work for you?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear Daniel's mental calculations. The Fairmont Olympic was where he had booked his romantic rendezvous with Ashley. The Georgian Room was where they had planned to have their intimate dinner. By suggesting that location, I was essentially inviting myself to crash his own affair. The Fairmont Olympic? His voice was carefully controlled, but I caught the underlying strain. "Yes, I upgraded my accommodations for the conference. Sometimes it's worth the extra expense to stay somewhere that reflects well on the business, you know? I thought you'd appreciate the networking potential." Another pause, longer this time. Daniel was clearly struggling to process how his wife had ended up staying at the same hotel where he had planned his extramarital tryst. "Of course," he said finally. "That sounds perfect. I'll see you at 8. Actually," I added casually, "I may have invited a few other people to join us. Conference networking, you understand. I hope you don't mind a slightly larger group." "Other people?" "Just some potential clients and industry contacts. Nothing too formal, but you know how important these relationship-building opportunities can be." I could hear Daniel's breathing change, and I knew he was beginning to understand that his evening wasn't going to unfold according to his original plan. The romantic dinner for two with Ashley Rodriguez had just become a professional networking event with his wife and her business associates. "How many people are we talking about?" he asked. "Still confirming the final count," I said truthfully. "But don't worry about the conversation topics. I'm sure everyone will be fascinated to hear about your work with Patterson and the Morrison account." The silence on Daniel's end of the line stretched long enough that I wondered if the call had dropped. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its artificial casualness. "Claire, is everything okay? You sound different." "Different how?" "I don't know. More confident, maybe. Like you're enjoying some kind of private joke." I looked around the conference center, watching dozens of successful professionals networking, negotiating, and building the kinds of strategic relationships that would advance their careers. 6 months ago, I would have felt intimidated by this environment. Now I felt like I belonged here. "I'm just feeling very clear about my priorities," I said. "Sometimes challenging situations help you understand what's really important." "What kind of challenging situations?" "Oh, the usual business complications. Discovering that people aren't always who they seem to be. Learning that trust is more valuable than convenience. Realizing that you're stronger than you thought you were." Another long pause. Daniel was beginning to understand that our conversation had multiple layers, even if he couldn't yet identify all of them. "Well," he said carefully, "I look forward to hearing more about your conference experience tonight." "I'm sure you will," I replied. "Oh, and Daniel? You might want to dress appropriately for the Georgian Room. It's quite an upscale establishment. The kind of place where appearances really matter. After ending the call, I spent the remainder of the afternoon attending conference sessions with renewed focus. Every presentation about market disruption, strategic pivoting, and competitive advantage felt personally relevant. I was no longer just learning about business theory, I was living it. The final session of the day was a workshop on crisis management in the hospitality industry, led by a veteran hotel executive who had managed everything from natural disasters to celebrity scandals. Her advice about maintaining professionalism under pressure while protecting your organization's reputation resonated deeply. The key to managing any crisis, she explained, is information control. Know what you're dealing with before your competitors do, and always have more than one option for resolution. Never let someone else set the terms of engagement if you can avoid it. I took detailed notes, recognizing that her advice applied to more than just business situations. Daniel had spent months setting the terms of our relationship based on information I didn't have. Tonight, that dynamic would be reversed. As the conference day concluded, I made my way back to the Fairmont Olympic with a sense of anticipation that was entirely different from the anxiety I had felt that morning. The hotel lobby was busy with the early evening crowd, business travelers checking in, couples meeting for drinks, tourists planning their evening entertainment. I moved through the elegant space with the confidence of someone who belonged there, nodding to the concierge staff who had already begun to recognize me as a valued guest. In the elevator ascending to my suite, I reviewed the evening's timeline. Daniel would arrive at the hotel expecting to coordinate with Ashley Rodriguez about their romantic dinner. Instead, he would discover that his wife had not only upgraded her accommodations to the same luxury hotel, but had also expanded their dinner reservation to include additional guests. The careful orchestration of his affair was about to collide with the professional networking skills that had built my business. The suite was exactly as I had left it, with my conference materials organized on the desk and my evening attire laid out on the bed. But now it felt different. Less like a hotel room and more like a command center where I was preparing for the most important negotiation of my personal life. I showered and changed into the black cocktail dress I had brought for the conference's networking reception, adding the pearl necklace that had been my grandmother's and the diamond earrings Daniel had given me for our second anniversary. If this evening was going to be about appearances and social positioning, I intended to look like someone who understood the value of strategic presentation. At 6:30, I called the Georgian room to confirm the final details of our reservation. "Good evening. This is Margaret from the Georgian room. How may I assist you?" "This is Claire Thompson, calling about the 8 o'clock reservation. I wanted to confirm that we're set for 4 people tonight." "Yes, Ms. Thompson. We have you down for a table for 4 at 8 p.m. Will you need any special arrangements for your business dinner?" "Actually, could you ensure that we have a table with some privacy? We'll be discussing confidential matters, and discretion would be appreciated." "Of course. We have a lovely corner table that offers both intimacy and excellent service. Is there anything else you need for this evening?" "Perfect. One more thing. If any of my guests arrive early, could you please seat them at the bar and let me know? I'd like to greet everyone personally when they arrive." Margaret assured me that the restaurant staff would handle every detail with professional discretion, and I hung up feeling satisfied with the preparations. The stage was set for an evening that would force Daniel to confront not just his deception, but his fundamental misunderstanding of who I had become during our marriage. At 7:15, my phone rang with a call from the hotel's front desk. "Ms. Thompson, this is Kevin from the front desk. I have a gentleman here asking about your room number. He says he's your husband, but our policy requires verification before we provide guest information." "What's his name?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Daniel Thompson. He's showing identification, but I wanted to confirm with you directly." I paused, considering my options. I could have Daniel sent up to the suite, where we would have privacy for whatever conversation was coming. Or I could maintain the element of surprise and meet him downstairs as planned. Please let Mr. Thompson know that I'm looking forward to seeing him at dinner, I said. Our reservation is at the Georgian Room at 8 o'clock. If he'd like to wait, the hotel bar is excellent. Certainly, I'll pass along that message. I could imagine Daniel's confusion as he received this information. He had expected to check into the hotel room he had booked for his rendezvous with Ashley, only to discover that his wife was not only staying at the same hotel, but had somehow taken control of their evening plans. 20 minutes later, another call came from the front desk. Ms. Thompson, I have a woman here asking about the Thompson reservation. She says she's expected, but there seems to be some confusion about the arrangements. Ashley Rodriguez had arrived, expecting to meet Daniel for their romantic evening. Instead, she was discovering that the hotel staff had instructions to route all inquiries through me. Could you please ask her to wait in the lobby lounge? I said. I'll be down shortly to clarify the situation. Of course. Should I mention that Mr. Thompson is also waiting in the bar? That won't be necessary, I replied. I think they'll find each other soon enough. I gathered my purse and conference materials, taking one last look around the suite that had served as my strategic headquarters for the afternoon. The evening ahead would be challenging, but I felt more prepared for difficult conversation than I had in months. Daniel had spent so much energy managing his deception that he had forgotten to consider what would happen if his wife turned out to be more formidable than he had assumed. The elevator descended toward the lobby, carrying me toward a confrontation that would determine not just the future of my marriage, but my understanding of my own worth and capabilities. Through the elevator's mirrored walls, I saw a woman who looked confident, successful, and entirely ready for whatever came next. Daniel had planned this evening as the culmination of months of careful deception. What he was about to discover was that his wife had spent the same months becoming someone he no longer knew how to manipulate or underestimate. The romantic dinner he had orchestrated was about to become a masterclass in the consequences of betraying someone who had learned to value herself appropriately. As the elevator doors opened into the elegant lobby of the Fairmont Olympic, I stepped into the most important business negotiation of my life, one where the stakes were measured not in dollars or contracts, but in dignity, truth, and the future I was determined to create for myself. The Fairmont Olympics lobby lounge was decorated in rich burgundy and gold tones, with comfortable seating arrangements that encouraged quiet conversation while maintaining an air of sophisticated elegance. I spotted Ashley Rodriguez immediately. She was exactly as striking as her LinkedIn photo had suggested, wearing a sleek navy dress that complemented her dark hair and confident posture. She was checking her phone with the slightly impatient expression of someone waiting for coordinates that weren't coming. At the hotel bar, Daniel sat with his back to the lounge area, nursing what appeared to be his second whiskey and periodically glancing toward the elevator banks. His navy blazer looked wrinkled from the flight, and his usual composed demeanor had been replaced by the tense energy of someone whose carefully orchestrated plans were spiraling beyond his control. Neither of them had noticed the other yet, but the collision was inevitable. I had perhaps 5 minutes to position myself strategically before Daniel and Ashley discovered each other's presence and began trying to salvage their evening. The old Claire would have confronted them separately, demanding explanations and probably dissolving into tears. The new Claire had a different approach in mind. I approached Ashley first, extending my hand with the warm professionalism I used when meeting potential clients. You must be Ashley Rodriguez, I said with a genuine smile. I'm Claire Thompson. I believe we have some mutual connections. Ashley's expression shifted from confusion to wariness as she shook my hand. She was clearly trying to place how I knew her name and why I was approaching her in a Seattle hotel lobby. I'm sorry, she said carefully, but I don't think we've met. Are you here for a conference? In a way, I replied, settling into the chair across from her without waiting for an invitation. I'm actually here because of Daniel Thompson. I believe you know him quite well. The color drained from Ashley's face as the implications of my introduction became clear. She glanced quickly around the lobby, probably looking for Daniel and calculating her options for graceful escape. "I think there might be some misunderstanding," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Actually, I think the misunderstanding has been cleared up quite thoroughly," I replied, maintaining my conversational tone. "You're here for a romantic weekend with a married man who told you his wife was safely back in Phoenix, unaware of your relationship. Unfortunately for both of you, his wife turned out to be more resourceful than either of you anticipated." Ashley's composure cracked slightly, and she leaned forward with a mixture of defensiveness and genuine concern. "Look, Claire, can I call you Claire? I know this situation is complicated, but Daniel told me that your marriage was already over. He said you were just waiting for the right time to make it official." I felt a flash of anger at Daniel's manipulation, but also something like sympathy for Ashley. She had been lied to as well, just differently. "Did he also tell you that he used our joint credit card to book this hotel room? Or that he charged his flight to our shared frequent flyer account? Or that he's been planning to divorce me for months while hiding assets to minimize what I would receive in the settlement?" Ashley's eyes widened as each revelation hit. Whatever story Daniel had told her about our marriage, it clearly hadn't included these particular details. "He said the financial stuff was complicated because of your business," she said quietly, "but that you two had already agreed on how to handle everything amicably." "There's nothing amicable about lying to your spouse for months while planning their public humiliation," I replied, my voice remaining steady despite the fury building in my chest. "But I'm not here to blame you for believing his version of events. I'm here because I think you deserve to know what kind of man you're involved with." Before Ashley could respond, Daniel's voice cut through our conversation from behind me. "Claire, what the hell are you doing?" I turned to face my husband, who was standing beside our table with his whiskey glass in hand and an expression that combined shock, anger, and what might have been the first stirrings of genuine fear. His eyes moved between Ashley and me, clearly, calculating how much damage had already been done and whether there was any way to contain the situation. "Hello, Daniel," I said pleasantly, as if encountering him in a hotel lobby while sitting with his mistress was the most natural thing in the world. "I was just getting acquainted with Ashley. She's lovely. I can see why you've been so distracted lately." Daniel's face went through a series of expressions as he tried to process the reality of what was happening. His wife and his girlfriend were having a civil conversation in the lobby of the hotel where he had planned his romantic getaway. Every assumption he had made about managing this situation had just been proven catastrophically wrong. "This isn't what it looks like," he said, the words sounding hollow even as they left his mouth. Ashley looked up at him with an expression that mixed hurt with something like disgust. "Actually, Daniel, I think it's exactly what it looks like. The question is why you told me such different stories about your marriage and your wife." Daniel sat down heavily in the remaining chair, setting his whiskey glass on the small table with hands that weren't entirely steady. He looked between Ashley and me as if we were adversaries in a negotiation where he no longer understood the stakes or the rules. "Can we discuss this privately?" he asked, looking directly at me. "This isn't the place for this kind of conversation." "Actually, I think this is the perfect place," I replied. "Public settings tend to encourage civilized behavior, don't you think? And besides, Ashley has a right to understand the full scope of what she's gotten involved in." I opened my purse and removed a folder containing printed copies of the documents I had discovered over the past few days: bank statements, email printouts, hotel reservations, flight confirmations, the entire paper trail of Daniel's deception laid out in chronological order. "Ashley," I said, sliding the folder across the table, "you might want to review these before you make any decisions about your future with Daniel. Pay particular attention to the timeline of when various arrangements were made." Ashley opened the folder and began scanning the documents, her expression growing more troubled with each page. Daniel reached toward the papers as if to stop her from reading, but I caught his wrist. "Let her see," I said quietly. "She deserves to make informed choices, don't you think?" "The offshore accounts," Ashley said, looking up from the bank. "Statements. You've been moving money out of joint accounts into accounts that only you control. How is that amicable?" Daniel's shoulders sagged as he realized that his carefully constructed narrative was collapsing in real time. "It's not that simple. The business arrangements, the legal implications." "The legal implications of fraud?" I interjected. "Because that's what transferring marital assets without disclosure is called, Daniel. I've already consulted with an attorney about that particular issue." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Margaret from the Georgian room, who approached our table with professional discretion. "Ms. Thompson, your table is ready whenever you'd like to be. Seated. Should I expect all 3 members of your party?" I looked at Daniel and Ashley, both of whom appeared to be struggling with the surreal nature of the situation. The romantic dinner they had planned had become something entirely different, but the evening was far from over. "Actually, Margaret, we'll need a few more minutes," I said. "But please hold our table. We have some business matters to resolve first." After Margaret departed, Ashley closed the folder and looked directly at Daniel with newfound clarity. "You told me your wife was unreasonable about money and that she was making the divorce difficult because she wanted more than she deserved," she said. "But these documents show that you've been systematically hiding assets while she supported your career and built her own business. You've been lying to both of us." Daniel's composure finally cracked completely. "Ashley, please. You don't understand the pressures I've been under. The financial situation, the family expectations, the business complications." "I understand." "Perfectly," Ashley interrupted. "You're a coward who thought he could manage 2 women like they were marketing campaigns. You underestimated both of us." She stood up from the table, gathering her purse with dignified efficiency. "Claire, I'm genuinely sorry for my part in this situation. If I had known the truth about your marriage and Daniel's financial behavior, I would never have gotten involved." "I believe you," I replied, and meant it. "You were working with incomplete information just like I was." Ashley turned back to Daniel, who was still sitting frozen in his chair. "Don't contact me again. Not for work, not for personal reasons, not for anything. And you might want to reconsider your approach to problem solving, because this strategy clearly isn't working out for you." With that, she walked away toward the hotel entrance, leaving Daniel and me alone at the small table in the lobby lounge. The silence stretched between us, filled with 4 years of assumptions that had just been permanently shattered. "So," I said finally, "what's your plan now?" Daniel looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of defeat and something that might have been relief. "I don't have a plan. This wasn't supposed to happen like this." "What was supposed to happen, Daniel?" "You'd have a romantic weekend with Ashley while I was safely in Phoenix, unaware of your affair. Then you'd return home and continue the charade until you could orchestrate our divorce on your terms?" He nodded miserably. "Something like that. I thought I could manage the situation until everything was resolved cleanly." "Cleanly," I repeated. "You mean until you could discard me without taking responsibility for the lying, the financial fraud, or the emotional manipulation?" "It wasn't supposed to be about discarding you," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I thought we could end things amicably once the business complications were sorted out." I leaned back in my chair, studying the man I had married 4 years earlier. He looked smaller somehow, diminished by the collapse of his elaborate deceptions. The confident marketing executive who had pursued me with such determination had been replaced by someone who seemed genuinely surprised that his actions had consequences. "The business complications," I said. "You mean the part where you've been systematically moving our marital assets into accounts that I couldn't access, while planning to claim that Desert Rose Travel Consulting was entirely my separate property, so you wouldn't have to share in its success?" Daniel's silence confirmed what I already knew. He had underestimated not just my investigative abilities, but my understanding of financial law and my connections within the business community. "Here's what's going to happen," I continued, my voice taking on the tone I used when negotiating complex travel arrangements for demanding clients. "You're going to return every penny you've moved into those offshore accounts. You're going to sign whatever divorce papers my attorney prepares, with the asset division terms that I specify. And you're going to do it all without creating any public drama that could damage my business reputation." "And if I don't agree to those terms?" I smiled, feeling genuinely amused for the first time all day. "Then I'll make sure that everyone in Phoenix's business community knows exactly how you've conducted yourself. Your marketing firm depends on trust and reputation, doesn't it? How do you think your clients will feel about working with someone who commits financial fraud against his own wife?" Daniel's face went pale as the implications sank in. His career depended on maintaining relationships with clients who valued integrity and reliability. A public scandal involving marital deception and financial fraud would destroy everything he had worked to build. "You wouldn't do that," he said, but his voice suggested he wasn't entirely sure. "6 months ago, you would have been right," I admitted. 6 months ago, I would have prioritized preserving your reputation over protecting my own interest. But I've learned some things about myself recently, Daniel. I've learned that I'm much stronger than either of us realized. I stood up from the table, gathering my purse and the folder of incriminating documents. The evening hadn't unfolded, according to anyone's original plan, but it had accomplished something more valuable than any romantic dinner could have provided: clarity. "I'm going back to my suite now," I said. "You can keep the room you booked, since you've already paid for it. But I suggest you use the time to think carefully about how you want to handle the next phase of this situation." Daniel remained, seated as I walked away, probably trying to calculate whether there was any way to salvage his position. What he didn't understand yet was that the game had already ended. The strategic advantage had shifted completely, and there was no amount of marketing skill or social maneuvering that could restore his control over the situation. The elevator ride back to my suite gave me time to process what had just occurred. The confrontation with Ashley and Daniel hadn't provided the emotional catharsis I might have expected, but it had delivered something more valuable: confirmation that I was no longer the same woman who had accommodated his deceptions for months without question. In my suite, I poured myself a glass of wine from the bottle the hotel had provided and stood at the window overlooking Elliott Bay. The Seattle skyline glittered in the darkness, representing possibilities I was only beginning to understand. Tomorrow, I would return to the conference, armed with new insights about trust, negotiation, and the importance of controlling your own narrative. Daniel had spent months orchestrating what he thought would be the perfect ending to our marriage, one that positioned him as the reasonable party while minimizing his financial obligations and maximizing his freedom to pursue Ashley Rodriguez. What he had created instead was the perfect beginning of my new life, one where I understood exactly what I was worth and refused to accept anything less. My phone buzzed with a text message from Jessica back in Phoenix. "How did the conference go today? Any major breakthroughs?" I smiled as I typed my response. "Bigger than I expected. Desert Rose Travel Consulting is about to enter a new phase of growth. I'll explain everything when I get back, but let's just say I've learned some valuable lessons about strategic planning and competitive advantage." The reply came back almost immediately. "That sounds mysterious and promising. Can't wait to hear the details." I set down my phone and returned to the window, feeling genuinely excited about the future for the first time in months. Daniel's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been inadvertently liberating. By forcing me to discover my own strength and resourcefulness, he had given me something far more valuable than the marriage we were about to end. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as I navigated the final day of the conference and began the process of restructuring my personal and professional life. But tonight, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: complete confidence in my ability to handle whatever came next. The woman who had boarded that flight in Phoenix this morning had been operating from a position of ignorance and accommodation. The woman standing in this Seattle hotel suite had discovered that she was formidable in ways she had never imagined. Daniel's perfect plan had backfired spectacularly, but it had also created the perfect opportunity for me to rewrite the story of who I was and what I deserved. As I prepared for bed, I realized that this day had been the most professionally and personally successful of my entire adult life. The conference had exceeded my expectations, my business was positioned for unprecedented growth, and I had finally stopped accepting less than I was worth from the people closest to me. Daniel could keep his offshore accounts, his elaborate deceptions, and his damaged relationship with Ashley Rodriguez. I had something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was capable of thriving on my own terms, with or without anyone else's approval or support. The final day of the Seattle conference dawned with crystal clear skies and the kind of crisp Pacific Northwest air that made everything feel possible. I woke in my suite at the Fairmont Olympic feeling more rested than I had in months, despite the emotional intensity of the previous evening. There was something profoundly peaceful about operating from a position of complete honesty after months of unknowingly living within someone else's web of deceptions. Daniel had texted twice during the night, both messages variations on the same theme of wanting to talk and explain. I deleted them without responding. The time for his explanations had passed, and more importantly, I no longer needed them. Understanding his motivations wouldn't change what he had done or who he had revealed himself to be. My morning began with a call from my attorney in Phoenix, whom I had contacted the previous evening after Daniel's confession in the hotel lobby. "Claire, I've reviewed the documents you emailed," Margaret Williams said, her voice carrying the crisp efficiency that had made her Phoenix's most respected family law attorney. "What your husband has done with the offshore accounts constitutes clear financial fraud in the context of marriage. The email evidence of premeditated asset hiding strengthens your position considerably." "What does that mean practically?" I asked, sipping coffee while watching the sunrise over Elliott Bay. "It means you have significant leverage in divorce negotiations. Courts don't look favorably on spouses who attempt to hide marital assets, and the systematic nature of Daniel's actions demonstrates intent to defraud. We can push for a settlement that not only recovers the hidden funds, but also penalizes him for the deceptive behavior." Margaret outlined the next steps, which included formal document requests, forensic accounting, and depositions that would make Daniel's financial manipulation part of the legal record. By the time I hung up, I understood that my position was even stronger than I had realized. The conference's final day included a presentation workshop where attendees could pitch their services to a panel of industry leaders. I had originally planned to present Desert Rose Travel Consulting as a boutique firm seeking regional expansion, but recent events had given me material for a much more compelling narrative. When my turn came, I approached the podium with the confidence of someone who had just proven her ability to handle complex, high-stakes negotiations under pressure. "Good morning. I'm Claire Thompson from Desert Rose Travel Consulting, and I want to talk about the intersection of professional excellence and personal integrity in our industry." I began with the standard overview of Desert Rose's services and client base, but then shifted to something more personal and immediate. Yesterday, I found myself managing a crisis that tested every professional skill I've developed over the past 3 years. Without going into inappropriate personal detail, I can tell you that the strategic thinking, relationship management, and crisis resolution capabilities that make Desert Rose effective for our clients proved equally valuable. In my personal life, I described how the travel industry's emphasis on contingency planning, information verification, and strategic communication had served me in an unexpected situation. The presentation wasn't explicitly about my marriage, but anyone in the audience could recognize the subtext of someone who had successfully navigated a complex betrayal using professional skills. The lesson for all of us, I concluded, is that the competencies we develop in business, integrity, strategic thinking, and the courage to act on accurate information aren't just professional assets. They're life skills that determine whether we accept the circumstances we're given or create the circumstances we deserve. The applause was enthusiastic, and several audience members approached me afterward with business cards and collaboration proposals. But the most significant response came from Victoria Harrison, the CEO of a Portland-based consulting firm that specialized in executive travel management for Fortune 500 companies. "Claire, that was one of the most authentic presentations I've heard at a conference in years," Victoria said, extending her business card. "I'd like to discuss a potential partnership that could position Desert Rose as our preferred vendor for West Coast luxury travel arrangements. Are you available for lunch?" Over lunch at a downtown Seattle restaurant that overlooked Pike Place Market, Victoria outlined an opportunity that would transform Desert Rose from a regional company into a national player virtually overnight. Her firm managed corporate, travel for technology companies, financial services firms, and entertainment industry clients who demanded the kind of personalized service that was Desert Rose's specialty. "The partnership would require you to expand your operations significantly," Victoria explained, "but the revenue potential would justify the investment. We're talking about contracts worth several $1,000,000 annually." I listened to her proposal with the focused attention it deserved, but also with the emotional clarity that came from having just restructured my entire personal life. 6 months ago, this opportunity would have felt overwhelming, requiring me to balance expansion, plans with Daniel's opinions and preferences. Now, the decision was entirely mine to make. "I'm interested," I said, "but I'll need to review the specific terms with my business partner and our attorney. When would you need a decision?" "Take your time," Victoria replied. "Good partnerships require careful consideration. But I will say this. What I saw in your presentation today was someone who understands that business success requires personal authenticity. That's exactly the kind of leadership we want to work with." I returned to the conference for the final networking sessions with a sense of professional accomplishment that felt entirely separate from the personal drama that had dominated the previous 24 hours. Daniel's betrayal had been devastating, but it had also clarified my priorities in ways that were already paying dividends. My phone buzzed with a call from Jessica back in Phoenix. "Please tell me you're sitting down," she said without preamble, "because I have news that's going to make your head spin." "I'm walking through Pike Place Market," I said, "but I can handle whatever you're about to tell me." 3 major clients called this morning asking about expanding their contracts with Desert Rose. Apparently, word is getting around the business community about your success at the Seattle conference, and people are impressed with how professional you've remained, despite some kind of personal situation they've heard rumors about. I stopped walking, processing what Jessica had just said. What kind of rumors? "Nothing specific and nothing damaging to you," she assured me quickly. "But it sounds like Daniel's behavior has become known in certain circles, and the consensus is that you've handled everything with remarkable grace and integrity." 2 of the callers specifically mentioned wanting to work with someone who demonstrates that kind of character under pressure. It seemed that Daniel's attempts to maintain his reputation while pursuing Ashley had backfired in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The business community in Phoenix was smaller than most people realized, and news of his deception had apparently spread through professional networks faster than he could control. "There's more," Jessica continued. "I got a call from someone at Daniel's marketing firm. Apparently, 3 clients have asked to be reassigned to different account managers, citing concerns about Daniel's judgment and reliability. His boss is not happy." I felt a moment of satisfaction that was immediately followed by something more complex. Daniel's professional destruction wasn't something I had orchestrated or wanted, but it was a natural consequence of his choices. When someone demonstrates poor judgment in their personal life, It raises questions about their professional capabilities. "How are you feeling about all this?" Jessica asked. "Surprisingly good," I admitted. "I thought I'd feel guilty about Daniel's problems, but I don't. He created this situation through his own actions, and now he's dealing with the consequences." "That's because you're finally understanding your own worth," Jessica said. "It's about time." I spent the remainder of the afternoon exploring Seattle, visiting the original Starbucks location, and walking through the Pike Place Market with the relaxed awareness of someone whose priorities had crystallized completely. The city felt different than it had when I arrived, more welcoming, more full of possibility. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at a quiet restaurant near the waterfront, reviewing my conference notes and planning the next steps for Desert. Rose's expansion. The partnership opportunity with Victoria's firm would require careful consideration, but it represented exactly the kind of growth I had been working toward for years. My phone rang as I was finishing dessert. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time since discovering his affair, I felt calm enough to take his call. "Claire, thank you for answering." His voice was subdued, lacking the confident tone I had grown accustomed to over 4 years of marriage. "You have 5 minutes, I said simply. "I've been thinking about what you said last night, and I want you to know that I'm prepared to meet your terms for the divorce. The offshore accounts, the asset division, all of it." "That's wise," I replied. "Margaret Williams will contact your attorney with the specific paperwork." "Claire, I need you to understand that I never meant for things to happen this way. The situation with Ashley, the financial arrangements, it all got more complicated than I intended." I set down my fork and looked out at the Seattle waterfront, where ferries were crossing Elliott Bay in the evening light. "Daniel, the problem isn't that things got complicated. The problem is that you made deliberate choices to lie, manipulate, and defraud me for months. Complexity doesn't excuse betrayal." "I know that now," he said quietly. "I just want you to know that I recognize how badly I handled everything." "Recognition is a good start," I replied. "But it doesn't change the fact that our marriage is over, or that you'll need to rebuild your reputation from scratch." There was a long pause before Daniel spoke again. "I heard about the problems at work, some of the client situations." "That's a natural consequence of demonstrating poor judgment," I said. "People in business want to work with individuals they can trust. And you? Can you ever trust me again?" I considered the question seriously, looking back over 4 years of marriage that I now understood differently. "Daniel, trust isn't something you can rebuild after systematic betrayal. But more importantly, I don't want to. I've discovered that I'm much stronger on my own than I ever was trying to accommodate your deceptions." After ending the call, I sat quietly in the restaurant, processing the finality of what had just occurred. The conversation felt like closing, a chapter rather than ending a relationship, because the relationship I thought I'd been in had never actually existed. Daniel had been managing my perception of our marriage while living an entirely different reality. But his betrayal had also been inadvertently liberating. By forcing me to discover my own capabilities and worth, he had given me the foundation for a life that was authentically mine. The woman who had boarded Flight 447 in Phoenix would never have had the confidence to negotiate a multi-million-dollar business partnership or handle a complex personal crisis with such clarity. I returned to the Fairmont Olympic for my final night in Seattle, feeling genuinely excited about returning to Phoenix and implementing the changes that would transform both my business and personal life. Desert Rose Travel Consulting was positioned for unprecedented growth, and I finally understood that I was capable of managing that success entirely on my own terms. The next morning, I checked out of the hotel with the efficient grace of someone who belonged in luxury accommodations. The first-class upgrade for my return flight was confirmed, and I settled into Seat 2A with the satisfaction of someone who no longer questioned whether she deserved premium treatment. As the plane ascended over Seattle, I looked down at the city where I had discovered my own strength and smiled. Daniel had intended this trip to be the perfect cover for his affair, a carefully orchestrated deception that would allow him to pursue Ashley while keeping me ignorant and manageable. Instead, he had created the perfect opportunity for me to demonstrate that I was far more formidable than either of us had realized. His betrayal had been devastating, but it had also been accidentally empowering. By underestimating me so completely, he had forced me to discover capabilities I never knew I possessed. The flight attendant offered me champagne, and I accepted it with genuine pleasure. Below us, the Pacific Northwest gave way to desert landscapes, and ahead lay a future that was entirely mine to create. Daniel could keep his offshore accounts, his damaged reputation, and whatever remained of his relationship with Ashley Rodriguez. I had something far more valuable, the knowledge that I was capable of thriving on my own terms, building success through integrity rather than manipulation, and creating relationships based on authenticity rather than accommodation. The marriage was ending, but the woman who had discovered her worth in a Seattle hotel lobby was just beginning. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.